Presenting you JustProfessor. You flip a coin 3 times and it lands on heads every time, so you're convinced the next flip will be tails. You meet 2 people from a city and they're both rude, so you decide everyone from that city is rude. Your brain is drawing massive conclusions from tiny amounts of data, and it's making you wrong about almost everything. Here's a scenario. You're trying a new restaurant for the first time. Your food comes out cold and the service is slow. You immediately decide this restaurant is terrible and you're never going back. But what if you just happened to come on a bad night? What if the chef called in sick? What if your server was training someone new? One experience, and you've made a permanent judgment. This is the law of small numbers in action. Your brain sees a small sample of something and treats it like it represents the whole truth. And this mistake is affecting way more of your thinking than just restaurant reviews. The law of small numbers is when people treat small samples as if they're representative of larger patterns. You see a few examples of something and your brain immediately jumps to conclusions about what's always true. You experience something a couple times and you think you figured out how it works. You meet a handful of people from a group, and you form opinions about the entire group. Your brain takes insufficient data and acts like it's rock-solid evidence. The problem is that small samples are unreliable. They're full of randomness and coincidence. A few examples can be total flukes that don't represent the bigger picture at all. But your brain doesn't care. It wants patterns and conclusions right now. It doesn't want to wait for more data, so it takes whatever small amount of information it has and confidently builds a whole belief system on top of it. This makes you wrong about a lot of things. You form false beliefs based on limited experience. You make bad decisions because you think you understand patterns that don't actually exist. You misjudge people, places, and situations because you're basing your judgment on way too little information. And worst of all, once you've formed these beliefs based on small numbers, you stop looking for more evidence. You think you already know the answer. Let me give you some clear examples of how this plays out. Sports fans do this constantly. A football team wins their first 3 games of the season, and fans immediately declare they're going to the championship. The team is amazing. They've figured it all out. But 3 games is a tiny sample. Lots of teams start strong and fall apart later. Lots of teams start weak and improve. 3 games doesn't tell you much about how good a team really is over a full season. But fans see those 3 wins and their brain says, this is what this team is. Or a player has a great game, and suddenly everyone thinks this player is a superstar. Or a player has a bad game, and everyone thinks they're washed up and should retire. 1 game. 1 data point. And people are ready to make sweeping declarations about someone's entire ability level. The law of small numbers makes people overreact to tiny samples and ignore the much larger body of evidence. Dating and relationships get destroyed by this. You go on 1 date with someone and it's awkward, so you decide they're not right for you. But maybe they were just nervous. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe first dates are always awkward and the second date would have been totally different. 1 date is a tiny sample, but you're treating it like you've seen everything you need to see. Or the opposite happens. You go on 1 amazing date and you're already planning your future together. You think you found your perfect match. But you've spent 3 hours with this person. You know almost nothing about them. That 1 date could be them on their absolute best behavior, and the real them could be completely different. Small sample, big conclusions. Usually wrong. Job interviews have this problem built into the system. Companies meet you for an hour and decide if you'd be good at a job you'd be doing for years. They're judging your entire professional capability based on how you perform in 1 artificial high-pressure conversation. That's an incredibly small sample. But both the interviewer and the candidate act like that 1 hour reveals everything. Sometimes someone who's great at interviews is terrible at the actual job. Sometimes someone who's nervous in interviews is amazing once they're actually working. But the law of small numbers says we should make major life decisions based on this 1 tiny interaction. Investment decisions get wrecked by this all the time. Someone buys a stock and it goes up for a week. They think they've discovered a winning strategy. They're a genius investor who can pick winners. But a week is nothing in investing. That could be pure luck. That could be random market noise. They're drawing huge conclusions about their investing skill from an absurdly small sample. Then they get overconfident, make bigger bets, and eventually lose money when the tiny sample turns out not to represent reality. Medical stuff falls into this trap too. You try a supplement for 3 days and feel better, so you're convinced the supplement works. But feeling better for 3 days could be 100 different things. Placebo effect. Natural fluctuation in how you feel. Coincidental timing. 3 days is way too small a sample to conclude that the supplement actually caused anything. But your brain sees the pattern. Took supplement, felt better, and immediately assigns cause and effect. Or you go to a new doctor once and have a bad experience, so you decide that doctor is terrible. But maybe they were having an off day. Maybe they had an emergency right before your appointment. Maybe there was a miscommunication. One visit is a tiny sample, but you're ready to write a bad review and tell everyone to avoid that doctor based on 30 minutes of interaction. Product reviews online are full of this. People leave 1-star reviews after using a product once. Bought this blender and it broke after 2 weeks. Terrible product. But manufacturing defects happen. You might have gotten the one faulty unit out of 1,000 good ones. Or you might have used it wrong. Or you might have gotten unlucky. One purchase is not enough data to judge whether a product is good or bad. But the law of small numbers makes people confident in their judgments anyway. The gambler's fallacy is related to this. You flip a coin 5 times and it's all heads, so you're absolutely certain the next flip will be tails. The coin is due for tails. But that's not how probability works. Each flip is independent. The coin doesn't remember what happened before. 5 flips is a small sample that happened to land all heads by random chance. But your brain sees that pattern and invents a rule. After several heads, tails must come next. That doesn't actually exist. People do this with weather constantly. It rains 3 days in a row, and you're convinced tomorrow must be sunny. Or it's hot for a week, and you think a cold front is definitely coming soon. Your brain is pattern-seeking based on small samples, but weather doesn't work on these simple patterns. 3 rainy days doesn't make sunshine more likely tomorrow. Your brain just wants to see patterns even in random variation. Stereotypes are built on the law of small numbers. You meet a few people from a particular country, or profession, or age group, and they share some trait. Your brain immediately generalizes. People from that country are all like that. People in that profession are all like that. But you met 3 people, maybe 5. That's not enough to say anything about millions of people. But your brain doesn't care about sample size. It just wants to categorize and predict. This happens with everything. You visit a city for 2 days and decide you know what that city is like. You try a type of food once and decide you don't like that type of food. You read one book by an author and think you know their entire style. You watch one video from a creator and judge their whole channel. Small samples everywhere. Big, confident conclusions everywhere. Most of them wrong. The really dangerous part is how this affects scientific and medical thinking. People hear about one study showing something and they change their whole life based on it. But one study is a small sample. Science requires replication. You need multiple studies with large sample sizes showing the same thing before you can be confident. But people read one headline about one study and they're ready to completely reorganize their diet or their habits based on it. So, how do you fight the law of small numbers? How do you stop jumping to conclusions based on insufficient evidence? First, actively ask yourself about sample size. Before you form a belief or make a decision based on experience, stop and count. How many examples do you actually have? 1 restaurant visit? 2 dates? 3 days of trying something? 5 interactions with people from a group? When you force yourself to actually count, you realize how small your sample usually is. And small samples shouldn't lead to confident conclusions. Second, remember that randomness exists. Just because something happened doesn't mean there's a pattern. Just because you saw something twice doesn't mean it always happens that way. Random variation can create streaks and clusters that look like patterns but aren't. The world is full of coincidences. Not everything that happens is meaningful or representative. Third, actively seek more data before deciding. If you're forming an opinion about something important, don't stop at your first few experiences. Go back to that restaurant a second time. Go on more dates with that person. Try the supplement for a full month. Meet more people from that group. Watch more videos from that creator. More data gives you a better picture of reality. Small samples can mislead you. Larger samples are much more reliable. Fourth, look for actual statistics and research instead of relying on personal experience. Your personal experience is by definition a small sample. You're just one person with limited exposure. But researchers can study thousands of people or cases. They can measure things properly. They can control for other factors. If actual data exists on something, use that instead of your handful of personal observations. Fifth, stay uncertain longer. Your brain wants to reach conclusions quickly. It's uncomfortable sitting with, "I don't know yet." But that discomfort is better than being confidently wrong. When you have limited data, the right answer is often, "I'm not sure yet. I need more information." Embrace uncertainty until you actually have enough evidence to reduce it. Sixth, watch for confirmation bias after small samples. Once you form a belief based on a small sample, your brain starts looking for evidence that confirms it and ignoring evidence against it. You decided that restaurant is bad based on one visit, so now you only notice the negative reviews and ignore the positive ones. Break this pattern by actively looking for evidence that contradicts your small sample conclusion. Seventh, remember regression to the mean. Extreme observations usually move toward average over time. If something seems amazingly good or terribly bad based on a small sample, it's probably going to be more average when you see more examples. That player who had an incredible game will probably perform more normally in future games. That product that seemed perfect in your first use will probably have some flaws as you use it more. Don't let the extremes of small samples fool you. Eighth, teach yourself to think in probabilities instead of certainties. Instead of, "This restaurant is bad," think, "My one experience was bad," which suggests maybe a 30% chance the restaurant is actually consistently bad, but I'm really uncertain. Instead of, "This investment strategy works," think, "It worked in this small sample, but that could easily be luck." Thinking in probabilities helps you stay appropriately uncertain when you have limited data. The law of small numbers is making you form beliefs and make decisions based on way too little information. You're seeing a few examples and treating them like they reveal universal truths. You're experiencing a handful of instances and acting like you've figured out reliable patterns. And most of the time, you're wrong because small samples are terrible guides to reality. This bias is everywhere in your thinking. Every first impression you form, every pattern you think you see, every conclusion you jump to. Your brain is constantly working with small samples and pretending they're comprehensive data. And you don't even notice it happening because it feels so natural to reach conclusions based on whatever information you have. The world is more complex and more random than your small samples suggest. That restaurant might be great on different nights. That person might be completely different after you know them better. That team might not be as good as their early win suggested. That investment strategy might have just gotten lucky. That city might be nothing like the 2 days you spent there. Small samples lie to you all the time, but your brain desperately wants to believe them because having beliefs feels better than having uncertainty. Understanding the law of small numbers doesn't mean you can never form opinions or make decisions. It means you need to hold those opinions loosely when they're based on limited data. It means being willing to update your beliefs as you get more information. It means staying uncertain when uncertainty is appropriate. It means recognizing that your handful of experiences might not represent the bigger picture. The next time you're ready to make a sweeping judgment based on one experience or a few examples, stop and count your sample size. If it's small, your conclusion should be small too. Don't let a couple of data points turn into a confident belief about how the world works. Stay uncertain. Seek more information. And remember that patterns you see in small samples often disappear when you look at the full picture. Watch the next video to learn about another bias that's making you believe things that are not true.